Welcome to James Madison's Montpelier. I'm Ryan Nobles from NBC 12 in Richmond, and we're continuing our conversation on the Bill of Rights. Joined by Police Chief Tim Longo from Charlottesville, who's also an attorney, Hank Chambers, who's a law professor at the University of Richmond, and Peter Irons, who's a widely published author and the political science professor emeritus at UC San Diego. Let's talk about due process now, gentlemen. And Chief, why was the due process law clause included in the Bill of Rights?
Well, keep in mind it appears twice. It appears in the Fifth Amendment, we'll call that the Federal Due Process Clause, and then again in the 14th Amendment, and that's Congress's opportunity to say, states, by the way, you got to play fair too. I mean, if we got to play by the rules, if there has to be processes and procedures in place before we can deny life, liberty, or property, then you need to play by that as well. And so that's really kind of, to some respects, what the 14th Amendment is about with respect to due process. Also, remember, it's also the way in which the first 10 amendments, or the Bill of Rights as we know them, are incorporated against the states.
Is it one of the things that kind of makes the Bill of Rights all work together, Peter? Is that a way to describe it?
Yeah, that's a very good term. It's sort of the glue that holds all of this together. The basic concept of due process is fairness. Fairness to the citizen, so that the government doesn't have an undue advantage when they're trying to make you do something or stop you from doing something. And the rules that grow up around due process, and due process, along with the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, have been the two clauses in the Constitution that have produced the most litigation, the most decisions by the Supreme Court and lower courts over the past years, particularly since the middle of the 20th century. You know, and fleshing out what this means in particular cases is the job of the judges. You know, what Justice Sandra Day O'Connor once said, well, what is undue process? And so distinguishing between the two and then linking them to particular other parts of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. And keep in mind that the Due Process Clause covers not only protection of criminal defendants, but in all kinds of civil cases. For example, they can't take away your Social Security benefits without a hearing. And that's one of the basic elements of due process. A hearing, notice of charges against you, and an ability to defend yourself.
Hank, can due process be something that gets in the way of a criminal investigation sometimes?
In theory, in theory it can, because it's the whole notion that we're a government of laws and not of men. So as a consequence, we have rules, and sometimes rules do seem to get in the way, but that's okay. We want rules to get in the way. We want government to be constrained in some situations and in some ways, because if government is unconstrained, then we're no longer free.
And is that something you deal with on a daily basis, Chief? Not at getting in the way, but making sure that you're practically applying due process to the folks that you arrest.
Well, not just the folks that I arrest, because I'm a government employer as well. So I need to think about procedural due process when it comes to disciplining employees, terminating their government employment. So due process plays out in a lot of different ways from running a police agency, not just how we enforce the law on the street or how we create policies, for example, that govern government employees. There are substantive due process considerations in that as well. So it's a big deal in government employment particularly.
Is it different then for the chief as a government employer, Peter, than it would be for a private employer? Or do you have the same sort of due process rights as if you work for a private company?
No, you have many fewer rights in general if you work for a private company, particularly if it's not written into a contract as to what your rights are. What's called employment at will. You can be terminated. The boss doesn't like the way you look or the way you dress. You know, you can be fired for any number of reasons. Now, federal law and most state laws now put some limits on that. You can't be fired because of your race, your ethnicity, your religion, your gender, but without good cause. But you know, the whole area of due process, the chief mentioned substantive due process. When I was teaching constitutional law, I tried my very best to explain to students the difference between procedural due process, which is sort of a redundancy, and substantive due process, and even I had trouble explaining that.
So Hank, explain that for us then.
Sure.
Well,
Not a problem. Two pieces of the puzzle. Procedural due process suggests that there are in fact rules out there that the government must follow. Substantive due process says that there are some rules that the government can't put in place at all. There's certain rights that the government can't infringe at all.
Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.